Hello, and welcome to Startup Stories with Scaleway, where we explore cutting-edge startups around the world and how they leverage cloud computing technologies. I'm your host, Ethan Pierce. Today's guest is Dr. David Lantz, founder and CEO of Ionburst, a cybersecurity startup providing defense and compliance solutions for a company's on-premises, public cloud, and private cloud data. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Ethan, and it's a real pleasure to be here today, and thanks to Scaleway, and it's great to be using Riverside F.FM as well.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's this platform's a great tool for getting good, actually great quality audio and video for things. So it's fun that's been a discovery and that you're liking it, and super excited that you've joined the startup program at Scaleway. To give our audience some context, I always like to start with the brief kind of the elevator pitch of what you do, so that we better understand what is Ionburst, and just, we're going to talk about your journey and what brought you here, what you do, and things like that. But just as a quick elevator pitch, tell us about Ionburst.
Okay. Well, Ironburst, fundamentally, we believe data privacy is a human right. But it's easy to say, but it's not accessible, and it's not affordable, and it's not easy to get. So that's where my small team and I sort of decided to do something about it in 2018. And to compare today's perimeter and cloud security and threat detection solutions actually cost $200 billion last year. But we still had 35 billion cloud records hacked. We had $20 billion in ransomware now. And the data loss from OVH's data centers, unfortunately, prove that better data security and resilience is needed. We can't recover data. And that's because there are some fundamental issues with the cloud movement, the move to cloud, the migration to cloud. And what we do is something very different. We protect data as an asset from the inside out, not the perimeter in, not the traditional way. And that's where our patent applied innovations come in, because we embed security, privacy, and resilience in every data object. So this is built for the cloud object store world. And that means we transform data into meaningless fragments that can't be understood by machine or people. Now, we then store those fragments across a moving array of data stores. Some people call it moving target defense, but we move the data around to make it difficult to find. And that defends against loss to hackers or even ransomware. Because if we lose a cloud store, then we're only losing certain fragments. And because those fragments are redundant, we're building the redundancy in at the data item level, we can still recover the data. Our pricing, importantly, our pricing is transparent. We automatically lock down cloud stores, so there's no configuration issues. And we encrypt all data to remove any customer key management overheads. So these are fundamental issues. And that provides great value from the smallest developer all the way up to the largest customers, where you can go from pay-as-you-go to monthly budgets, so you can organize your financials without surprises. And that gives us a competitive edge for partners. And that means Ironburst is one of the first solutions, if not the first solution, to be able to store data, ultra-secure data at scale, more securely, privately, and with greater resilience across public cloud and at less cost than the global private cloud providers.
Well, I think there's a lot of great pieces there that we're going to dig into, and when we, unfortunately, data privacy and security and things like that are sometimes subjects that people come to after they've had a problem and not pre-planning for, but I think the message is getting out there. I mean, we're seeing more and more of these incidents. You mentioned the ransomware thing. Right now in the U.S., the price of gas is skyrocketing or not even available in certain places because of the pipeline issues with the hacking that went on. In the crypto space, when we're looking at the DeFi solutions and different things, we've definitely seen some problems where poor programming for smart contracts and other things have really created a lot of exploits. And so I think people are learning to the hard way to not necessarily trust their data or the tools that they're using, or realize that things have to be done. But the good thing is to get the message out there before they have a problem, which is why it's so interesting then to talk about what you're doing at Ionburst and how you're solving that. And I'm always interested then in the backstory of how things came to be, because there's usually a light bulb somewhere that caused people to be like, oh, I need that, or I need to build that because something happened, or what that might be. And then especially then the founders, the team, the advisors, the investors, all that kind of stuff seems to come together because of some interesting moments. So is there kind of a backstory of how this came to be at Ironburst?
Yeah. The backstory is quite simple. I mean, I came from the world of e-commerce card payments, and we built in technologies called, which we call in Europe 3D Secure, which was the MasterCard and Visa. One was 3D Secure, the other one was 3D Sets. I mean, they had different names for it. But in effect, it became the internet security that people use for e-commerce in Europe. Never really made it to the States, but it was in Europe. And of course, all that happened was fraud then started moving from there to different places. Okay, so the fraud will always move around, and you think, well, actually, how do I protect what are becoming billions of endpoints? They were people, but now we talk of endpoints because the IoT world's here. How are we going to protect all these billions of endpoints from the perimeter in? And the reality is, it's impossible. It's like having the world's most secure aircraft carrier, and you just keep firing exocets at it, and eventually you're going to sink it. And that's the problem with perimeter security. As good as we can have it, we're not going to hit everything. We're not going to stop everything. That's why we had 35 billion cloud records hacked last year. That's why ransomware was up. So you have to think of a different way. So how do we protect data, which is the stuff the hackers are after, in a different way? How do you give it the resilience? Because if you think about the traditional world, and this is where the crux of what the problem is, as I see it, we have data security, which is encryption generally, okay? And we have privacy. But privacy in the online world and the on-premise world was the same as security. I've got my own firewall, I've got my data centers, I've got my physical architectures, and I've now encrypted my data. That keeps it private. In the cloud world, that isn't the same. And, of course, we now have regulators, the world of regulations coming in. And regulators will regulate. They don't tell you how to fix the problem, but they'll tell you the pain points if you don't. So organizations are going to say, okay, well, we've now got GDPR, and we've always had HIPAA in the States, and there's a classic example of something that's still not sorted from 1996. So we're not good at privacy. We kind of understand security because NIST gives us some recommended tools, and we go and use them. Ransomware guys then use them against us. So security and privacy are different in the cloud. And encrypted data that's stolen in the cloud or hacked isn't private data as far as GDPR is concerned. So there's an a different problem when you move to cloud. You then think about resilience. And we have our RAID 5 servers that mean we can lose disks, and we keep going slowly, but we keep going. Not quite as scalable in the cloud, so we've moved to object storage. And then, of course, backup, or 3-2-1, or if you're a guy that's been around as long as me, the grandfather, father, son backup strategy, you can do that in cloud, but who's got my data? Who's got that? And how many third parties are involved? And when cloud vendors, the big guys like AWS, talk about failover, their failover is about duplicating data so they can fail over if they lose infrastructure. Where are all the copies of that data? Where's the prints of all of that? How do I keep that secure? And then, of course, the good old EU, after the US Cloud Act came along and said, sorry, we don't like the EU-US Data Privacy Act anymore, Shield anymore, sorry, so we're going to invalidate that. And the cloud vendors will say, but we've got standard contract clauses and binding corporate rules, but it only takes 1 weak point and your data is exposed. So how do you protect data so that it's useless to hackers, it can't be surveyed, it can't be sold on, it's private to those it should be private to, and it is sovereign. And by sovereign, I mean it remains only of value and identifiable metadata, if you like, in the jurisdiction that it is governed by principally. So it's a long kind of answer, but it's kind of these four areas: security, privacy, um, recovery, and governance, and regulation, and then, of course, climate control. Everybody wants a low carbon cloud. How do you cut the amount of data you store? Ironburst achieves all of these things in one solution.
Well, I think one of the points that really seem to come up to me a lot in there too is being proactive about putting this into place. And unfortunately, a lot of the solutions that exist in cybersecurity are kind of buckled on after the fact, like it's not really thought into the idea. And so we are seeing a lot more of this need and even the regulatory push for privacy first. And this idea where in our data models we are building in from the beginning a respect for people's private data, for corporates' private data, not only to respect the privacy aspect on that individual level, but also to expect that problems are going to come along, that we're going to have data loss, that we're going to have attacks, that we're going to have issues. And so it makes complete sense then to turn to a solution that is meant to be put in to, from the beginning, to kind of wrap all of that and protect that, and not as a kind of reactionary, oh, now we have problems, we have to fix it. So that's brilliant to hear kind of the holistic approach that you're bringing to that. So in the context then of solving these problems, maybe we can talk a little bit about the technology behind Ironburst, and how you are achieving this idea of these using these particles that are not, that they are anonymous, not identifiable, that they are redundant to create kind of this resilience. You mentioned the ransomware resilient side of this. You also on the website talk about quantum resilience, which is a big topic as we look at the future of encryption, everything in crypto and elsewhere, of the coming wave of what quantum computing could bring to that. But when we look at rolling out this data protection and repair and defense concept, how do you do that? What's your secret sauce? What's the technology to do that?
It's pretty cool, but you got to remember we live in a world of, let's not call them standards, but the requirements, recommendations, as Nick would call them. So when you're changing let's call it the direction of a juggernaut, which is the IT industry, which is based on standards, and even if they're industry kind of standards as opposed to recommended standards, it's difficult to change. So one of the things we actually do is all of our technology, to the level we use crypto, etc., our algorithms are in effect NIST recommended algorithms. They would comply with FedRAMP, they comply with generally any nation's security posture. But what we do is we turn it into a non-deterministic approach. And by that, what I mean is, how do you change that asymmetric advantage the hacker has, who only needs to get through one gap? And we've got, as I say, billions of endpoints, billions of ways into that cyber perimeter that's no longer defined. They only need to get in once. So how do you make it difficult for them? And you make it difficult for them by turning predictability to unpredictability. But you can use that still using crypto. So when we're talking about quantum resilience, I'll come on to that, we use symmetric algorithms for that. So AES, Cha-Cha, these kind of things. And we can chop and change those. Okay, so you never know which one we're using. And they are quantum resilient because basically quantum computing will really impact the world of your kind of RSA type stuff, your asymmetric encryption. It's not really going to be a massive challenge for symmetric encryption. We just increase the keys, we just do different algorithms, we can spin that. So from that point of view, you get a little bit of that resilience, quantum resilience against that. And then, of course, when we're starting to talk about sharding algorithms, for example, well, we're used to RAID. RAID is a sharding, it's erasure encoding. That's been migrated to the cloud in terms of the way we do object storage. It's still erasure encoding. So there's lots of technologies like that you can still use. And in fact, we use them partially because they give us scale. The reason encoding the cloud and object storage, that's why it's there, because it's actually fast. It gives you fantastic capabilities to retrieve data and do AI and all that kind of analytical stuff on it that other clever people do. So we can base a lot of our technology on that, but the way that we apply our own methods, our own patent applied methods, and some of our trade secrets is in making it non-deterministic. A simple example, if I take this cup and just say this cup was a digital asset, I might want to store this cup because it's my digital asset, it's really important to me, in the cloud. I may break that up into 5 pieces. I will store those 5 pieces that now don't look like the cup. They're just anonymized, context been removed, metadata's been removed, it's been tokenized. So we're using technologies people are using to do these kind of things like privacy, preservation, etc. And I store the 5 fragments in different data stores. We call the data stores cloudlets. That's what we call it in Ironburst terms. Now, say ransomware happens to impact one of those cloud stores. Now, I only may need 3 fragments back to rebuild my cup. So I can afford to allow 2 cloud stores to ransomware. Disruption, it's not always bad. It could be, unfortunately, like the data center fires at OVH, or which can happen anywhere, or it could be some other kind of disruption or just downtime. But I want to get my cup back on demand anytime. I don't want to wait for a backup. And I want that while it's stored and while it's in transit to be secure and to be private. And that's where we bring these technologies together, like encryption, sharding algorithms, privacy preservation in terms of the tokenization, the removal of the metadata, the anonymization, these sort of things. We bring all that out, and then we persist the fragments that result with that level of redundancy in, out to the cloud stores. And when we talk about self-repairing data, it's basically a transition from self-defending networks or self-repairing networks where you get that kind of failover if you lose some degradation. It's the same here. So in my little example here where I was talking about my 3 from 5, it's like having a small basketball team on the court. 3 players, one of them gets nobbled, he gets wheeled off and another one comes on. It's that kind of thing. It's just self-repairing. It's perm any 3 from 5. And when we're talking about self-defending, what Ironburst then does that's clever is behind the scenes, unbeknown to any customer, Ironburst will continuously monitor all of these cloud stores, its cloudlets. And if we detect, lots of people say, you've got AI or machine learning. I'm a traditional computer scientist. We monitor, okay? So if we detect that there's a problem with a cloud store, it could be latency. It's just the heartbeat's getting longer, so we don't actually know, but we can just cut our metadata type because our architecture itself is completely asynchronous, which means there's only one step to go. So even if a hacker could get into our architecture, get behind all those guys that do the front-end cloud stuff and then get into our containerized world, which we secure, then they'd only get one step at a time because our architecture is massively fragmented, like our data. And indeed, our code moves as well. So what happens at that stage is we're able to cut our metadata ties with cloud stores. If we think there's a problem, we spin back some of the fragments we need. So if I lost a cloud store that's one of my fragments here, I got 4 fragments left, I only need 3. I'll bring 3 back. I'll spin that data item back out. And this time, because it's non-deterministic, the policy applied may not be 3 from 5, but it may be 4 from 7. You continue, and it may be a different encryption algorithm, but it's the same data classification. So the idea is you can never say never, and we all know there's no silver bullet. But what you can do is you can make it mighty tough for anybody to break in, and you can provide a level of ransomware protection and a massive amount of quantum resilience and future-proofing in this kind of technology. So if you're a large organization, you can bring along your own algorithms. So imagine this, Ethan, for the first time, you talk to a CISO and you say, how do you want to balance security and resilience? And they typically go, well, I got my RAID 5, that's not going to really work. I need something else. Okay, I got my backup strategy. Yeah, but you want to have less data stored. Ironburst can do that, and we can say, well, what do you want fragmentation-wise? You want us to give you a fragmentation policy that's, say, 10 from 15. That's 50% overhead in data store, but it's five. You can afford to lose 5 cloud stores, 5 regions, 5 data centers. That world, when we're moving to edge, IoT, 5G, is the way we're going to have to protect data.
But I think what's super interesting then in that idea is this idea that you have this very fluid and responsive system, because I think a lot of solutions that people have in place, if they have anything in place to protect their data, a lot of those are either outdated, they're not kept, so they've not been kept up to date, and whatever that might mean. They're maybe not completely thought through, so there are already potentially some holes in how the data is being protected. Potentially, they're going to have issues where, because it is a single solution that's just been kind of thrown at their data, then eventually, if somebody's persistent, they can reverse engineer that and finally get inside. So I find this really interesting, this idea that you kind of have this reactive and almost alive approach to the data storage and your infrastructure architecture itself, so that already it's miles beyond what potentially they could have already had in place to protect their data. But now, if somebody's actively trying to break that and get into it, then there is a whole other level of kind of that reactivity that's going to make that an incredibly complex task. And so, unless people are looking for specific data, very often I think a lot of cybersecurity crimes are also, low-hanging fruit. What is the easy data for me to get to? So by putting into a solution like this that is making it, if the harder I go after it, maybe the harder it's going to be for me to get to it. That's brilliant. Now, you've explained probably, I think, for in terms of how this works, if people understand the space, they probably can understand what you do differently from your competition. But I'd love to hear from you specifically how you distinguish yourself from competitors, and why should companies choose you over another cybersecurity provider for their data?
Yeah, it's great, because that's a fantastic question, Ethan, because actually there's a lack of awareness of what the cloud providers actually give you. People think, and in fact, I think it was McAfee did a great survey. I think it was 2019, and it was like 1,100 CISOs, senior IT guys around the world, in 11, 12 countries. And I think it was 69% that said, "Yep, no, the cloud provider, they give me data security." And I think 12% said, "No, they definitely give me that." You're thinking, no, they don't. I mean, Google may do something, but not generally. You have to pay for that. And then there's, the whole concept of configuration, migration management, that sort of thing. And it's interesting, out of those 35 billion records that were hacked last year, 29 billion were due to misconfiguration. So one of the things that Ironburst actually does is it moves straight into where we see the gaps in the shared responsibility model. In effect, the commercial model between the cloud vendors, cloud providers, and their customers about who's responsible for what when it comes to security. And with Ironburst, what we've done is we work really hard because, again, let's get back to it. Data privacy is a human right. And there's lots of small organizations that can be pretty well put out of business for mistakes that just are down to awareness if they are ended up in the end of a fine for a breach. So what we do is, from a cloud object storage point of view, we embed that security, privacy, and resilience in all customer data. So that's not an optional extra for us. So you don't pay for encryption with us. You get encryption for every data item. You don't need to manage the keys. We do all of that kind of management, all auto. You don't have to do any configuration management. We do that. That's parked in. From, pay as you go all the way up. You get that. It's standard. That privacy compliance with GDPR or whichever privacy regime you're in around the world, that's also standard. We give you that. The sovereignty issue is slightly different because we need more engagement in that because organisations are all very different. And the self-service modules, you don't tend to get that. They are single region type products. But we bake these things in, so we give you the security, the privacy, and the configuration management all in effect in the price. So we fill in there. And because we're API and SDK Connect for developer community, it's pretty easy. I think it's 2 steps to be able to connect in with an Ironburst cloud product. So that's where we're kind of different. So in terms of the customer experience, instead of, say, connecting in with S3 where we've started, because AWS are the big guys, so it was a good place for us to start. Instead of connecting in with their S3, you connect in with our super secure S3 at the back with Ironburst technology transforming your data. So that's one of the great things we do. And we want to make that invisible to our customers because that's our game. We do that. So that's one of the things. They get unparalleled data encryption capabilities. I mean, as I was saying to you before, because of the non-deterministic, it's a cybernetic system. It moves, it changes, it adapts. They don't need to know. They don't need to even be based on, okay, I'm using AES and there's my key and that's it for my data set. No, every data item gets a key. That's different. And we're adding that in now. That would cost you a fortune if you wanted to go for key management services and say AWS or any of the cloud providers. You get that with us. Now, so that's a really key thing. And you also get the ability with products that we've got, some of the open source products, which we've got, one of the first ones being INFS, which is Ironburst file system. So you can have that in your own AMI or on your own premises. You manage your own metadata. You can encrypt your own metadata, so you've got a no-knowledge system, as far as we are concerned, an architecture based on zero trust principles throughout, and we push out what we consider to be zero data at the other end. We don't believe we can give anybody on this planet better data security or privacy or resilience than that. So we give those. No other big cloud provider, or even the specialists who do what they consider private cloud, compete with what we've got. Because what we can do is we can effectively persist our data across the public cloud and spread it and hide it in that public cloud, if you will, more securely than basically saying you've now got a private cloud facility and it happens to be in a data center here. Well, all you've done is picked up one massive target and put it somewhere else. Whereas with ours, it's like putting drops of water from a glass across the 7 seas. Only we can get the glass of water back. So those kind of things.
So that really helps understand, what you're doing differently from potential competitor solutions. If somebody's listening to a podcast like this and thinking, okay, that's interesting, I could see why that would apply to someone else. What would you say in terms of the kind of companies that should call you? Potentially people who don't realize that this is accessible to them, this kind of data protection and defense. Who should be picking up the phone and calling Ironburst to say, I need you to help me protect what I do?
Okay, so there's a number. We have 2 solution sets. One is the Ironburst cloud solution set, and that's self-service, and that's targeted at developers, and in fact, the developers DevOps community generally. So we want to support that. We want to be part of that. We are all about the shift to the left kind of stuff, as my much younger teammates tell me that I'm an old guy, so it was always security baked in for me. But we want to target that community because there's a community of people who are developing fantastic technologies that need data security and privacy in a world where it's beyond their understanding, not just their understanding because they can't understand it, but data privacy isn't everybody's bag. It's a pretty dry subject and everybody thinks it's a legal thing or somebody else's, but actually it can come and bite developers now. There's also the issue of just how do you secure your data so that it is secure from ransomware, it is secure from disruption, from eavesdropping from third parties. So the developer community or any organization that can connect in with our API or develop to our SDKs. So it's not a end user mum and pup business that comes in, kind of goes into an ultra secure kind of Dropbox. It's much more that kind of sophisticated developer, DevOps, or organization that wants to have that kind of level of capabilities. Now, having said that, that's for that side. Larger organizations who just want ultra secure and resilient storage and private storage can connect in too, because that's what the monthly tariffs are about. And in fact, we're about to develop a portal so they can have greater control over that. So that's just, we want this security. We've got our applications. We know how to build into APIs. We want a secure back end. We have some views over security, data classifications for security, the resilience we want, the privacy levels, etc. So that's one thing we can do. And that's cloud. And that's a super exciting area for us, because that's going to be the first solution set we're going to deploy on Scaleway. And that makes us cloud agnostic. And that's a fantastic place for us to be, because that's where we want to be. And we can help Scaleway customer straight away. So God forbid anybody else suffers what OVH suffered, because that's not good for any of us. But a customer coming into Scaleway using Ironburst technology could still keep going without needing an alternative backup strategy if a data center went down. That's what's cool about what we've got. You then look at the guys who are kind of looking at the guys who are knocking on our door, and these are the defense sector, the defense primes, and the banking sectors, the FS sectors in the UK, in France, we've had interest, and in Germany, we've had interest, because of the concept of data concentration for them. Regulators are saying, go to the cloud. It's safer. I mean, on what basis they think it's any safer than where we come, I don't know. There are great, fantastic technologies, and Scaleway will have fantastic security people, but you could argue they could be equally fantastic if they were in an organization on-prem. So these are kind of organizations where they're worried that they're migrating their data to one cloud provider, but they're not getting resilience, so they're having to migrate it to 2 or 3. What does that mean? 1, I have to have 3 sets of skills. I've got 3 sets of data. My attack vector's higher. The defense industry, they're interested in the shiny tools. They want something that can be defensive in nature, which Ironburst can give them, and potentially offensive in nature. That's not really our gig. Data privacy is a human right. So you've got those guys, and what they're interested in is the on-prem and on-cloud and IoT capabilities. We have an Ironburst running on a Raspberry Pi, for example, so we can scale the technology down to a very low cost factor. And what they're interested in is cloud migration. Can you give me secure data from the migration point of moving from on-prem into cloud, full reconciliation with the kind of security and resilience that Ironburst gives? So we've done one of those already in Australia for an FS customer, which I can come on to later. But that's given a lot of interest in that area. With the interest comes the inertia. They don't like to change. So they look at the tech and they say, you mean I don't need my backups anymore? You mean you can look after the encryption keys? You can secure it in public cloud. There's some really big issues of awareness and understanding. And you have to pivot that back to, well, do you really think you get that in cloud today? So there are kind of key spells, but those sectors where the defense, healthcare, FS are our 3 big sectors. These are organizations or agencies that will have a portal where they define data classification, the protection data they want down to security, the fragmentation policies, the sovereignty areas they want to put to. They can just knock themselves out on this stuff. So they can actually have their own DNA of security.
So the You brought up Scaleway several times. This is the Startup Stories with Scaleway podcast, and so that takes us definitely to the discussion about infrastructure. And in this partnership with the startup program, what are your needs in terms of infrastructure, given the solution that you're providing, in order to scale up the business of Ironburst and respond to all the customer needs that you've just outlined?
Yeah, okay. So we would say our needs are quite simple from the point of view of the get-go. Let's get going. So we've built Ironburst is a cloud-native, highly scalable technology, and that's a fantastic place to start. So what do we need? We need scalable storage, and we need an ability to compute resources and scale those resources on demand. Ironburst is a massively scalable product. Technology. It's very linear in the way it processes data. So that ability to scale quickly on demand is great. Now, more fundamentally for us, though, and this is important, is we wanted to find a partner who shares our values. Data privacy is a human right. Why do we have to pay for data being pushed across regions? It's great the way that the big cloud vendors make money, but actually it's not transparent and it's not fair, and you get shocks, and nobody likes shocks when it comes to bills. Nobody likes that. And what we liked about Scaleway was, they have a view, they share the value, multi-cloud, multi-regional deployment shouldn't be limited just to those that can pay the big bucks. It should be open to everybody. Because you know what? If that's open to everybody, the world goes around better. Everybody can do commerce with one another. More money in people's products, more pockets. That ends up with the world going a bit better, a bit faster. So it's that transparency. The environmental efficiency side is one I've not really touched on, because our technology stores less data than any comparable technology, but still gives you better resilience on demand at the data object level. Now, that's fantastic. And if you think about a new kid on the block, let's call us new kids in the block. We may not be wet behind the ears, but we're new kids in the block. Scaleway are kind of like that. They're starting to punch their way, and they've got a different view, and they're coming from a European concept of what data privacy and security and sovereignty means, which is very different from the rest of the world. And we believe in that, and there's a massive drive from the EC, the European community right now, to have those things. Well, that's the biggest economy in the world. So why wouldn't we want to be part of that? Why couldn't we help a Scaleway scale? Sorry, that just sounded so wrong.
No, I think that's fantastic. And definitely, I know that the team is excited in the startup program to have Ionburst as a part of what they're doing. To close this out, I guess I just would be interested in kind of what your next big steps are. What's in the pipeline? What's coming for Ionburst?
Okay, that's really cool. So our first big thing. Sorry, we've got Edinburgh's cold today, so I've got the heating on. So either freeze or fry. Beg your pardon. Our first big thing is the release of Ironburst Cloud on Scaleway. So that's just ongoing now, and it's imminent. And that means Scaleway customers will have access from pay-as-you-go pricing to the world's, most stringent data security, privacy, and resilience out the box with transparent prices. So that's we're really excited about that. And we see that as a way for us to show Scaleway the capability we've got as a European setup, and as a capability for them to consider, the Scaleway organisation to consider themselves in terms of having that ultra-secure storage solution that a customer can go to avoid things like, for example, the OVH thing, so we can give them those capabilities out of the box. So that's really cool. And we want to build our business in UK and Europe. That's where we came from. Scaleway have moved into the UK, which was brilliant for us because we had an EU instance, and of course, when the UK moved out of the European Union, we had to put one in the UK too. So we all suffer from that sort of thing. But we're also then working hard to provide more integration points. So a number of client applications, which will be open source, because we believe in, again, the open source community. Together we're better. So the metadata server I talked about, IronFS, which gives developers and organizations even more control over the security of their data. So even if we were decided to store our fragments in the US, even under the Cloud Act, they would not be able to work out what those fragments were, where they came from, who they belonged to, etc. And they could have a complete no-knowledge system. So that's one of the really cool things. So, and we believe in allowing people to have those capabilities because it's their data. So there's that sort of stuff. We've got a secrets management service, which sounds like, okay, it's another Me Too. But imagine a secrets management service that enables you to save all the money that you would normally have to pay on key management services with a cloud vendor. That's baked in. You can have that as part of your Ironburst pay-as-you-go system, or for a small price on the monthly. So we're really excited about that, and we can see ourselves scaling those really well with Scaleway. And then, of course, there's S3 compatibility. Amazon are the kings when it comes to, still the kings when it comes to cloud. It's kind of interesting how the kind of retail marketer, or the retail organizations actually got the top technology, and the big tech companies like Google and Microsoft are behind. But actually, S3 compatible is pretty important. If you've got that, you can scale a lot. We can plug into people's organizations as backup. So no reason why you don't still use your backup system, but the data you store now can be Ironburst data, completely secure. So, and we see that as being a fantastic offering, not just direct, but with Scaleway.
Well, thank you for this discussion, David. I've learned a ton. I wish you all of the best as you scale up Ironburst.
Yeah. I'm really appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity. Sorry for probably over answering a few of the things, but I get very excited about my technology.
I love when people are passionate about their answers and about what they do. And I think this was rich with lots of, I think you defined a lot of things that people might not have understood, or you really kind of walked us through some very interesting concepts. So this was really useful. I appreciate your time and appreciate your answers. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Startup Stories with Scaleway. If you're a startup that uses cloud computing resources, be sure to check out Scaleway's startup program at scaleway.com. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or your preferred podcast platform, and check out all of the previous episodes of the podcast. Again, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.